The lights were too bright, the way they always are at these things, and I'd been standing under them for almost 20 minutes answering the same 3 questions in slightly different orders. How does it feel to finally launch the company after 5 years of work? What was the hardest part of getting here? Who do you want to thank? I gave the answers I'd rehearsed in the car on the way over, the ones that sounded humble and grateful without sounding rehearsed, even though every word of them had been rehearsed. And when the reporter asked the third question, the one about who I wanted to thank, I didn't have to think hard about the answer, because it was true before it was ever a talking point. Honestly, none of this happens without my best friend, I said, glancing across the room to where she was standing near the drinks table, half hidden behind a cluster of investors who didn't know she was the reason the company had survived its worst year. She's been with me since the beginning. Literally since the beginning. We started this thing in her apartment because I couldn't afford office space. The reporter smiled, scribbled something down, and moved on to her next question, but my eyes stayed on Elise a beat too long enough that if anyone had been paying attention, they might have noticed something in my face I wasn't ready to name out loud. We'd met in college, assigned as project partners in a business class neither of us particularly liked, and something about the way she argued with the professor respectfully, but without backing down, made me decide on the spot that I wanted her in my life permanently. Not romantically, not back then. Just as a friend. The kind of friend you build things with. And we had built things. A failed food truck business in our early 20s that taught us more about failure than either of us wanted to learn. A moving company that lasted exactly 1 summer before we both admitted we hated manual labor more than we hated our old jobs. And then, 5 years ago, a software company that had started as a favor for a friend's small business and had somehow, improbably, turned into the thing we were now standing in a rented event space celebrating. She'd never once asked for public credit. She could have. She'd earned it 100 times over the late nights, the time she'd covered payroll out of her own savings when a client paid late, the version of the pitch deck that had actually landed our first big investor, which she'd rewritten from scratch after I'd botched it twice. But every time a reporter or an investor asked who was behind the company, she deflected, pointed the spotlight toward me, said something modest about being just the operations person, which was such an enormous understatement it almost made me angry on her behalf. Tonight, though, something felt different. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. She'd been quieter than usual all evening, present but somehow distant, like part of her mind was somewhere else entirely. I found her about an hour later, after the formal remarks had wrapped up and the party had loosened into its natural, informal rhythm, small clusters of people talking business in one corner, someone's cousin monopolizing the open bar in another. She was standing near the edge of the room, away from the crowd, staring out a window at the city lights below. "You disappeared," I said, coming up beside her. "I needed air." "Well, air adjacent. This is the closest thing to air in a building with the windows painted shut." "You did good tonight," I said. "I know you hate hearing that, but you did. None of this happens without you, and I meant every word of that answer I gave the reporter." "You give me too much credit," she said, not looking at me, still watching the lights outside. "I give you exactly the amount of credit you've earned, which you consistently refuse to accept, which is a character flaw, by the way, and one of these days I'm going to fix it." That got a small laugh out of her, but it faded fast, replaced by something heavier that settled over her face. "Can we talk somewhere quieter?" she asked. "Away from all this." Something in her voice made my stomach tighten, not with worry exactly, but with the particular kind of alertness you feel when you sense a conversation is about to become something bigger than the room you're standing in. "Yeah," I said. "Of course." We ended up in a small side hallway near the coat check, away from the noise of the party, away from the photographer who'd been documenting the evening for the company's social media, away from anyone who might overhear whatever she was about to say. "What's going on?" I asked. "You've been off all night." She leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, working up to something. I'd known her long enough to recognize the posture, the way she squared her shoulders before saying something difficult, a habit I'd first noticed back in college when she used to brace herself before pushing back on a professor. "I got an offer," she said finally. "A real one. A director role at a company in Seattle. Good salary, good equity, the kind of thing that doesn't come around twice." My stomach dropped, fast and hard, an actual physical sensation, like missing a step on the stairs. Are you taking it? I don't know, she said. I've had it for 2 weeks and I still don't know, which is not like me. You know I'm not a person who sits on decisions. You're not, I agreed. So what's holding you back? She was quiet for a long moment, long enough that the silence started to feel like its own kind of answer. Ask me why I never took public credit for any of this, she said instead of answering my question directly. You've asked before, and I've always given you some deflecting non-answer about not needing the spotlight. I want to actually answer it now. Okay, I said carefully. Why? Because if people started asking about me, started paying real attention to what I actually do here, eventually someone would ask about my personal life. And I've spent 5 years very carefully not having to answer that question, because the honest answer has always been complicated in a way I didn't want to explain to a stranger with a microphone. Complicated how? She looked at me then, really looked at me, in a way that made the noise from the party down the hall seem to fade into something distant and irrelevant. I've wanted you for so long, she said. Since college, honestly. Since that stupid business class project where you argued with me for 45 minutes about market segmentation and I went home and couldn't stop thinking about how much I liked arguing with you. I've wanted you through the food truck and the moving company and every single year of this company, and I never said anything, because I was terrified that if I did, I'd lose the version of you I got to have as a best friend, and some version of you was better than no version of you at all. I stood there, stunned into silence, the words landing somewhere deep in my chest and setting off something I hadn't let myself feel in years, because feeling it had always seemed dangerous, like touching a wire I wasn't sure was live. Why now? I finally managed to ask. Why tell me tonight, of all nights? Because of the job offer, she said. Because for the first time in 5 years, I have a real, legitimate reason to leave, a reason that has nothing to do with you, that no one would question, that would let me walk away clean instead of having to explain why I couldn't stay. And I realized, sitting in this hallway trying to decide whether to take it, that if I left without ever telling you the truth, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd just said it. I've done enough wondering. I'm tired of wondering. So this is a goodbye, I said, something cold settling into my chest at the thought. You're telling me this because you're already gone. No, she said quickly, stepping closer. I'm telling you this because I needed you to know before I made any decision at all. I needed the choice to actually be a choice, not something I was running away into because staying here quietly loving you from a safe distance had become unbearable. I felt something crack open in my chest, some wall I'd built so long ago I'd forgotten it was even there, a wall I'd built the same way she had, out of fear that naming the thing between us would break something I couldn't survive losing. I need to tell you something too, I said. And I need you to actually hear it, not just assume you already know what I'm going to say. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper now. I've felt it too, I said. 4 years. I told myself it was just how close friends feel about each other, that the way I looked forward to seeing you more than anyone else, the way every important moment of my life has had you in it whether it was supposed to or not, I told myself that was just friendship, just partnership, just the natural closeness that comes from building something together for 5 years. But it was never just that. I think some part of me has known that for a long time and just didn't have the courage to look at it directly. She let out a breath, shaky and uneven, her eyes bright in the dim hallway light. So what do we do now? She asked. I have a job offer sitting in my inbox and a business partnership that's meant everything to me and a friendship I've been terrified of losing for 5 years, and now apparently something else entirely that I don't have a script for. We figure it out, I said. Together. The way we figure out everything else. We didn't solve everything that night, standing in that hallway with the sound of the party filtering faintly around the corner. Some things aren't meant to be solved in a single conversation, no matter how honest it is. But something had shifted, decisively and irreversibly, in the space of those few minutes, and neither of us tried to pretend otherwise. I don't want you to turn down the job because of this, I said. Not yet. Not like this. If you stay, I need it to be because staying is actually what you want, not because you're scared of what happens if you leave. That's very mature of you, she said, a small, watery smile breaking through. Annoyingly mature, actually. I was hoping you'd just tell me to stay and make this simple. I've never once made anything simple for you, I said. I'm not about to start now. She laughed, a real laugh this time, and the sound of it eased something tight in my chest. Can I ask you something? I said. Something that's been sitting in the back of my mind since you said all that. Go ahead. If I had said something first years ago, back in college, or even 3 years ago when we were pulling all-nighters trying to save the company from that bad quarter, do you think we would have tried? Or do you think it would have ruined everything, the way you were always afraid it would? She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything, turning it over before offering an answer she actually believed instead of one that just sounded good in the moment. I used to think it definitely would have ruined everything, she said. That's the whole reason I never said anything. But standing here right now, having said it, having watched you not run away, not get weird, not immediately try to smooth it over and pretend it didn't happen, I don't think I believe that anymore. I think we would have found a way to make it work, the same way we've found a way to make everything else work, because that's just who we are together. So what happens with the job? I asked. I need to know you're not going to just disappear to Seattle out of some sense of self-protection now that the truth is out. I'm not disappearing anywhere, she said. I think, and correct me if this is presumptuous, I think I want to see what this is. What we could be. And I don't think I can figure that out from 2,000 miles away over video calls, no matter how good the Seattle offer is. It's not presumptuous, I said. It's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. We stood there a while longer, close enough now that the space between us had shrunk to almost nothing, close enough that I could see every flicker of emotion crossing her face, relief, and nerves, and something warmer underneath both of those, something that looked a lot like hope. I'm scared, she admitted. I want you to know that. I've protected this friendship for 5 years because I was terrified of exactly this moment, and now that it's happening, I don't actually know how to not be scared of it. I'm scared too, I said. But I'd rather be scared and honest than comfortable and lying to both of us for another 5 years. I don't want to look back on this company someday and realize the biggest thing we built together was a wall between us instead of everything else. She reached out and took my hand, the same way she used to when we were nervous before a big pitch meeting, except this time it meant something entirely different, something that made my pulse pick up in a way pitch meetings never had. Okay, she said. Let's find out what this is. Slowly. Carefully. Without blowing up the company or the friendship in the process. Slowly and carefully, I agreed. I can do slowly and carefully. You've never once done anything slowly and carefully in the 5 years I've known you, she said, laughing. Well, I said. There's a first time for everything. We went back into the party a few minutes later, separately, so no one would notice we'd been gone at the same time, both of us wearing expressions we hoped looked normal but probably didn't, not to anyone who knew us well. Elise turned down the Seattle offer 2 weeks later, not out of fear, but because, as she put it, she'd finally found a genuine reason to stay that had nothing to do with hiding and everything to do with choosing. We took it slowly, the way we'd promised each other in that hallway. Dinners that weren't quite dates and weren't quite not dates, conversations that lingered longer than they needed to, a careful, deliberate unwinding of 5 years of built-up caution. We told the rest of the team about 6 months later, once we were sure enough of what we were building to risk it becoming public, and to our relief, nobody seemed particularly surprised. Apparently everyone else had noticed what we'd spent years too scared to admit to ourselves. The company kept growing. We kept building things together, the way we always had, except now there was nothing left unsaid between us, no careful walls, no protected distance. If anything, the partnership got stronger, because we'd stopped spending energy managing a secret and started spending it on each other, honestly, without the constant low hum of fear underneath everything. A year after that night in the hallway, we got married in a small ceremony with the same people who'd been there for every failed business and every late night and every version of us that had led up to this one. Elise gave a toast at the reception, a rare thing, given how much she usually avoided public speaking, and she told the story of the food truck, and the moving company, and the software company, and how she'd spent 5 years too scared to tell her best friend the truth. But he beat me to it, she said, looking at me across the room, her eyes bright. Turns out he'd been wondering the same thing the whole time. We just needed one honest hallway conversation to finally catch up to what was true the entire time we were too scared to say it. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the noise of running a company together has settled into something manageable, she'll bring it up again, not because she's unsure, but because she likes hearing me say it, the same way I like hearing her say it back. Did you really feel it the whole time? She'll ask. Even back in that stupid business class? The whole time, I tell her. I just needed you to be brave enough to say it first. Rude, she says, but she's smiling when she says it, every single time, because we both know it's true that sometimes the people who build the biggest things together are also the ones who take the longest to admit what they were building it for.